He was known as the Quiet One, the spiritual soul of the Beatles. While John Lennon and Paul McCartney soaked up the spotlight with their magnetic personalities and prolific songwriting partnership, George Harrison quietly forged his own identity within one of the most famous bands in history. But behind that calm, composed demeanor simmered a deep-seated resentment that few ever truly saw coming. The dynamics of power and creative control within the Beatles often led to friction, and Harrison found himself at the center of it more than the public ever knew. George Harrison was born on February 25, 1943, at 12, Arnold Grove in Wavertree, Liverpool, the youngest of 4 children born to Harold Hargreaves Harrison and Louise Harrison. Harold worked as a bus conductor and had previously served as a ship steward with the White Star Line, while Louise, of Irish Catholic descent, worked as a shop assistant. George grew up with an elder sister named Louise and 2 elder brothers, Harold and Peter. The family lived modestly in a terraced house that lacked modern amenities, with an outdoor toilet and a single coal fire for heating. In 1949, they relocated to a council house at 25 Upton Green in Speke. Louise Harrison was a deeply musical woman. Her enthusiastic singing voice was known to rattle the windows of their home, and during her pregnancy with George, she frequently tuned into Radio India broadcasts, drawn to the mystical sounds of sitars and tablas. Biographer Joshua Green noted that she hoped this exotic music would bring peace and calm to her unborn child, a detail that, in hindsight, feels like a remarkable foreshadowing of George's own deep spiritual and musical journey. George enrolled at Dovedale Primary School at age 5 and later passed the 11+ exam to attend Liverpool Institute High School for Boys. Despite the school offering a music course, George was disappointed by the absence of guitars and found the educational environment stifling. His musical influences during his teenage years were diverse: George Formby, Cab Calloway, Django Reinhardt, Carl Perkins, and Lonnie Donegan all shaped his early tastes. But it was a pivotal moment in early 1956, while riding his bicycle, that truly ignited his passion. He heard Elvis Presley's Heartbreak Hotel drifting from a nearby house and was instantly captivated by rock and roll. Around the age of 14, his mother Louise purchased him a second-hand guitar for £3.10, and a family friend taught him foundational songs. From that point on, there was no turning back. Inspired by Lonnie Donegan's skiffle music, Harrison formed a group called the Rebels with his brother Peter and a friend. It was during this time, on a bus ride to school, that he encountered Paul McCartney, a chance meeting that would set the course of music history. In March 1958, George Harrison auditioned for John Lennon and Paul McCartney's skiffle group, the Quarrymen, at Rory Storm's Morgue Skiffle Club. Lennon initially felt that Harrison, who had just turned 15, was too young to join. However, McCartney arranged a second audition on a Liverpool bus, where Harrison impressed Lennon by playing the lead guitar part for Raunchy. He was eventually welcomed into the group and became a full member, despite his father's wish that he continue his education. Harrison left school at 16 and briefly worked as an electrician's apprentice at a local department store before music consumed his life entirely. In 1960, the Beatles secured gigs at clubs in Hamburg, Germany, where they began honing their craft in the city's vibrant and demanding music scene. However, their stint was cut short when Harrison, still underage, was deported for being unable to legally work in nightclubs. By December 1961, Brian Epstein had taken over as their manager, refining their image and securing a recording contract with EMI. Their debut single, Love Me Do, charted at number 17, and their first album, Please Please Me, launched them into a level of fame that would come to be known as Beatlemania. During the Beatles' arrival in the United States in early 1964, Harrison was notably unwell with strep throat and a fever. Medical advice prompted him to conserve his voice ahead of their historic performance on The Ed Sullivan Show. His reserved demeanor during this period earned him the nickname, the Quiet Beatle, a title that amused Harrison himself and stuck throughout his career. Despite his quiet reputation, Harrison's musical contributions to the Beatles were anything but minor. He had 2 lead vocal credits on the band's debut album and earned his first solo songwriting credit, Don't Bother Me, on their second album, with the Beatles, in 1963. As the band evolved, so did Harrison's musical vision. By Rubber Soul in 1965, he was steering the band toward folk rock influences inspired by the Byrds and Bob Dylan, and he introduced Indian classical music into their sound with his use of the sitar on Norwegian Wood. By Revolver in 1966, Harrison contributed Taxmen, Love You Too, and I Want to Tell You, compositions that demonstrated genuine depth and originality. His exploration of Eastern instruments and spirituality continued through Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band in 1967, where his composition, Within You Without You, became one of the album's most meditative and adventurous tracks. Yet despite this blossoming creativity, Harrison's songs were consistently relegated to secondary status. Lennon and McCartney dominated the Beatles' output, typically leaving Harrison room for only 2 or 3 songs per album. This imbalance bred deep frustration. Harrison desired more creative control, more recognition, and more respect, and he was not getting it. At the heart of Harrison's frustrations was his complicated relationship with Paul McCartney. The two had known each other the longest. They had met as young boys on that school bus and bonded immediately over their shared passion for music, often learning and rehearsing guitar chords together. McCartney has fondly referred to Harrison as his baby brother, and there was genuine affection between them. But as the Beatles rose to global dominance, a more difficult dynamic took hold. McCartney's creative vision increasingly dominated the band's direction, particularly during the recording of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band in 1967. His perfectionism in the studio was legendary, but from Harrison's perspective, it crossed into something more controlling and dismissive. Harrison later described his experience during the recording of McCartney's song, Maxwell's Silver Hammer, in 1969 with barely concealed exasperation, noting how McCartney would enthusiastically help with his own songs but show far less enthusiasm when it came to Harrison's material. He described the dynamic as selfish and stifling. In a revealing 1974 interview, Harrison made his feelings about McCartney's musical dominance starkly clear: I would rather have Willie Weeks on bass than Paul McCartney. Paul is a fine bass player, but he's a bit overpowering at times. I would join a band with John Lennon any day, but I could not join a band with Paul McCartney, but it's nothing personal. It's just from a musical point of view. Harrison even went so far as to say that McCartney had ruined him as a guitar player, a statement that captures just how suffocating he found the experience of working under McCartney's shadow. By the time of Abbey Road in 1969, tensions reached a breaking point. Harrison asserted himself more forcefully, rejecting McCartney's suggestions for changes to his own songs. It was a significant shift. Harrison was no longer the quiet junior member willing to defer. He demanded recognition for his artistic contributions. That same year, during the tumultuous Let It Be filming sessions at Twickenham Studios, Harrison famously quit the band, disillusioned with the studio environment and the interpersonal dynamics that had made it feel more like a battle than a creative collaboration. He returned 12 days later, but the wounds did not fully heal. In a candid 2020 interview, McCartney himself acknowledged the long-standing imbalance. It was easy to underestimate George because me and John had always written most of the stuff, and had had most of the singles, and George was a late bloomer as far as writing was concerned. He wasn't that interested in the beginning, but then he started to get interested, and boy, did he bloom. He wrote some of the greatest songs ever. The admission was gracious, but it came decades too late for the relationship between the two men to ever be entirely free of tension. Harrison did eventually receive the recognition he deserved. His 2 contributions to Abbey Road, Here Comes the Sun, and Something, are widely regarded as among the greatest songs in the Beatles' entire catalog. Something became his first A-side single, topped charts across multiple countries, and was famously praised by Frank Sinatra as the greatest love song of the past 50 years. Even John Lennon regarded it as the best song on Abbey Road. While the Harrison-McCartney feud is better documented, a lesser-known but equally painful tension existed between Harrison and John Lennon. Their relationship had begun long before the Beatles' rise to fame, and Harrison genuinely admired Lennon's wit, intelligence, and creative brilliance. But admiration and resentment can coexist, and over time, Lennon's dominating and dismissive attitude toward Harrison left deep scars. Lennon rarely took Harrison's songwriting seriously in the band's early years and was known to mock his spiritual journey and devotion to Indian music and mysticism. For Harrison, a man whose entire later identity was shaped by his Eastern philosophical pursuits, this dismissal cut to the core. As the Beatles entered their final years, Lennon and Harrison's interactions grew increasingly cold. Harrison later described Lennon as a difficult and self-centered person. Perhaps most tellingly, in his memoir I, Me, Mine, Harrison barely mentioned Lennon at all, a silence that spoke more powerfully than any direct criticism could have. Although he mourned Lennon's death sincerely, Harrison never romanticized or sugar-coated the emotional wounds that their relationship had left behind. Despite the decades of friction, the bond between Harrison and McCartney never fully broke. On February 11, 1994, the two reunited with Ringo Starr in McCartney's studio, dubbed the Beatles, to work on reviving and used John Lennon demos. They still got on each other's nerves, by their own admission, but they showed up. In a 2001 online chat, when asked whether McCartney annoyed him, Harrison responded with a philosophical Victorian proverb about knowing a friend's faults and letting their foibles pass, a remarkably measured response from a man who had spent decades navigating one of music's most complicated friendships. Harrison passed away on November 29, 2001, at the age of 58, after a prolonged battle with cancer. In the days before his death, McCartney sat with him for several hours at a treatment facility near New York. "We joked about things, just amusing, nutty stuff," McCartney recalled. "He was my baby brother, almost, because I'd known him that long. We held hands." The day after Harrison's death, McCartney told reporters, "He was a lovely guy and a very brave man and had a wonderful sense of humor. He is just my baby brother." George Harrison's legacy endures not only through his music but through the honors and tributes that have followed his passing. He was posthumously inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a solo artist in 2004, received a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 2015, and was honored with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 2009. Martin Scorsese's 2011 documentary George Harrison, Living in the Material World gave the world a fuller, more nuanced portrait of the man behind the quiet exterior. What George Harrison's story ultimately reveals is that greatness is rarely forged in comfort. His frustrations, his resentments, his long struggle for recognition, all of it fed into some of the most enduring music ever recorded. Behind the peace signs and the quiet demeanor was a man who burned brightly, felt deeply, and left a mark on the world that no amount of overshadowing could ever erase.